Canto 10, The Gaze Bearing, is going to be a masterpiece in terms of writing, and we know it because we predict all of it and how peak it'll be. It will be even better than Canto 6 and 7. How do we know? Well, Canto 10 is going to be about our favorite French stranger that we barely know much of, but he shows a lot in his book, his actions, and most importantly, his egos. This stranger barely has any dialogue. Even more interesting, this sinner has an infamous book counterpart with heavy themes that put a focus on society's gaze, yet also on one's own gaze on life itself. And the book is one of the favorite books of the creator of Limbus Company, Kim Yi-hoon, which means this sinner's canto might not only get philosophically deep, but also could mean something big for the future of Limbus, and perhaps even the city itself. And it will tell us more about a district that has been teased to us for many years. Ladies and gentle imps, today me and this plushie I found on the street,
hello,
will be teaming up together to crack the mystery of Cinder number 5, our big handsome Frenchman meursault. And together with our findings, we will predict what will happen in Canto 10, or at least something adjacent to it. And why are we so confident in our predictions, you might ask? Well, dear viewer, not only are we somewhat literate,
but I don't know how to read.
But we will both focus on what we do best. Dear viewer, here is our plan. Welvader is best with handling books. He will start with analyzing the themes of The Stranger from Albert Camus. He will also look at what events might play out in the future canto and what character arcs meursault might go through. My specialty, however, is ego analysis, so I will be looking at symbolism in meursault's base ego, as not only do a sinner's base ego showcase their themes and somewhat predict their backstories, their other egos also have connections to abnormalities which each their own stories and themes. To put it simply, there is a reason as to why each sinner has their respective ego, right? Considering themes and such, so why not use it to theorize? Lastly, at the end, me and Welv will combine our smarty pants power to come up with some insane Canto 10 predictions. And I mean insane. I want a fucking bingo card to come out of this.
If I ask you the question of which book is one of the most often referenced Cinder source materials by the community, what would you answer? Well, obviously you're gonna answer The Stranger, because what else do you think this video is about? Honglu's source material or something? Literally no one references that book other than the 4 people in this whole community who have read it, including me. Anyway, yes, the answer is The Stranger, and that is for a good reason. It is one of the shortest books out there and also has some of the most iconic scenes out of all the source materials. If you've been in this community for any substantial amount of time, you've likely heard of the "yesterday my mother died" quote, or heard about that one time meursault shot an Arab man because the sun was in his eyes. Which, clarification, he didn't just shoot the guy, he unloaded a whole fucking barrel onto him. Though this book being so short and already somewhat well known does not take away from any analysis of it that can be done, and thankfully I've done that work for you. As in this part of the video I intend to cover segments of the book, but this is mostly a character analysis. If you want a book summary, there's plenty of other videos that already do that. Today, my mom died. Or maybe it was yesterday. This is how the book starts and is an excellent example of meursault's characterization. This placid, cold and analytical statement over your own mother's death is but just a simulacrum of his character. This, however, is not the meursault we know. The meursault we know is from the end of the book. This meursault, however, makes mistakes. He takes a smoke with the funeral director the day before the funeral. He reprimands himself to his boss for taking a 4-day break to attend his mother's funeral. And most importantly, he did not grieve at the death of his mother. The meursault we know would not make these mistakes. He knows how to grieve on paper. He knows what typical social taboos are. He would not misremember whether his mother's death was today or yesterday. Yet he still carries that same indifferent apathy towards the idea of self-expression. Meursault is a complicated character to dissect, especially near the end of the book. And cleverly, the characters in the book act to either enhance his characteristics or act as a foil to it. For example, Marie, an ex-E.G.O worker Meursault met on the beach the day after the funeral and later ends up becoming his girlfriend. Multiple times throughout the book, Marie will attempt to be intimate with Meursault. When asked whether he loves her, he says it doesn't matter, but doesn't think he does. And even later, Marie asks if Meursault would marry her, to which he replies uncaringly but accepts it anyway if it makes Marie happy. Marie really showcases how far Meursault's indifference towards life goes. This is not the kind of nihilism that Honglu has, even though it may look similar, but rather this may stem from a similar place when Meursault said it is sufficient to live within the bounds of rigidly established routines. To Meursault, marriage isn't a case of sharing your life with another, it is establishing a new routine. Whereas, for example, Honglu would simply go along to wherever life drifts him. Also, funny little side tangent, Meursault does show love, but it is rather superficial and largely only physical. On multiple occasions occasions throughout the book, I think like 6 or 7 or so times, meursault will mentally go on a tangent about Marie's breasts, which low-key kind of freaky, but it is a little hilarious out of context that this guy's 2 defining personality traits are having the emotional capacity of a literal brick wall and really liking tits. Like, he really loves Marie's honk jonkers, her big tiggy-bobs, her mythical bubbles, her... Anyway, moving on. Raymond, another character in the book who's low-key kind of an asshole and on multiple occasions beats his wife in the book. Yes, you heard me right. Multiple times he takes advantage of meursault's nature. Meursault's not one to push back and as such is rather agreeable to a lot of things. Sure, he has his own thoughts and opinions, but does not enforce them upon others. So when Raymond asks meursault to write blackmail to Raymond's wife to lure her back so Raymond can beat her again, he simply accepts it and witnesses the consequences later. This acts as a foil to meursault because sure, while he does help people and accepts their request, is it really out of kindness or is it more of a routine thing? Especially when it comes to matters like blackmail. There's just simply a distinct lack of empathy for it all, as if he's just going through the motions. This is also shown through Celeste, a local restaurant owner that meursault likes to frequent. When you have a place that you really like and often visit, you would usually do it because you really like the food, the atmosphere, or the people there, right? Well, meursault only really does it for the sustenance. He doesn't connect with the owner, he doesn't connect with the people there, he doesn't go there to relax. It is most of the time purely to just grab some food. Psychologically, this is usually reflects to positive stimuli, as often we like to reciprocate positivity in kind, but meursault consciously chooses to be this distant, as if the idea of connecting is unappealing to him or just a waste of time. The book is largely a slice of life as meursault gets into various events after the funeral. For example, aside from the events I mentioned with the characters previously, there's also a scene with Emmanuel, his neighbor and a dog owner, where meursault watches him be abusive towards his dog. Then later in another scene overhears the same person lamenting and mourning his dog having run away from home, which yet again is another foil to his character, as an abusive piece of shit animal abuser somehow cared more about his abused pet than meursault ever cared for his mother. Anyway, now we get to the scene that everyone is waiting for. Later in the book, Masson, a friend of Raymond, invites meursault and Marie to stay over at his place for a while and go to the beach. They go to the beach but end up meeting 2 Arab men who had unfinished business with Raymond as they approach the group menacingly. Raymond immediately prepares for a fight and tells Masson and meursault to ready up for a group fight. Not knowing they came prepared with a knife that leaves Raymond with a pretty deep cut, for which he has to get treated at the hospital. Shortly after Raymond gets treated, he comes back with a gun, though he himself never ends up using it. The gun is given to meursault as Raymond goes back to meursault's place, but meursault, however, decides to take a stroll on the beach. There, he meets one of the 2 men again, laying by the rockside and tanning in the sun, and meursault stands there for a while, gripping the gun in his hand. He of course had the idea of revenge in mind, but something about the sun blinding his eyes is making him unable to think straight. It is far too hot, far too gleaming, far too intense. The heat of the sun, the unfiltered searing of ultraviolet light, makes a gunshot ring out in the midst of the calming waves of the sea, followed by more gunshots as the barrel of the gun empties out. And this is something I'd like to point out a bit more. Meursault often makes comments in regards to feeling pressured under light. During his mother's funeral, he couldn't focus because the lights there were too bright. And also when bringing his mother's casket to church, he couldn't focus because the sky's shine was unbearable. And of course, here he takes someone's life because, well, the sun was in his eyes. Now, I would do an analysis here, but the book does that for us, as the next half of the book is dedicated to go to jail. Yes, you often don't hear the community talk about this segment for some ungodly reason, but meursault goes to jail and is later drilled for his crimes. Which, spoiler alert, it ends in a very French way. Hint hint, nudge nudge. And in jail, we get some more interesting characterization. For example, to pass the time, meursault mentally reconstructs his entire apartment by mapping out in his mind every single minute detail of his apartment, down to the length by which objects were apart from each other. He also ends up meeting with his lawyer and later the judge, both critiquing meursault's behavior, not his actual crimes. His lawyer asking questions about why meursault didn't show remorse for his victims or on the day of his mother's death, and being weirded out when meursault said there was no reason to be remorseful for it, and blaming the son for not being able to focus during those moments. The judge critiques him from a religious standpoint, claiming that he is the literal Antichrist for not showing empathy, and if he was truly sorry that he would immediately begin praying and apologizing to God for his crimes, which Actually, an interesting side tangent that can be drawn from this. Perhaps because of NCORP's relatively religious side to it and a focus on the human experience, having a proper funeral would maybe be seen as a very special social ritual, where proper respect and mourning are given to the departed since it may be integral to the all-encompassing human experience NCORP gloats about. And I can imagine that especially the Inquisition department of NCORP would heavily scrutinize and blame Meursault. Months after his time in prison, the trial proper takes place, and a surprisingly large audience is gathered. In the book, it is because it was a slow news season, but perhaps in the Project Moon universe, it could be in relation to what I mentioned earlier, and Meursault not showing respect for the past being a massive social taboo, and a lot of people showing up to judge him. In fact, the whole trial feels like the world is judging Meursault for his behavior rather than his concrete acts. The defendants focus on Meursault's nature as a person, and of all the defendants, Marie, Raymond and Celeste are the only ones to defend him and say he is a kind man, though everyone else blames him for his behaviors rather than his actions. How dare he not show remorse for his mother's death or the father of two he killed? How dare he shoot a man all because the sun was in his eyes? How dare he be so apathetic during the trial itself? He should grieve, he should show remorse, he should feel emotions. How can this emotionless husk of a man ever be forgiven when clearly he himself cannot forgive? And so, it would only stand to reason that a man as cruel as him should be given the highest of punishments, the death penalty. And so, the judge rules his judgment. Meursault will be publicly executed by guillotine for everyone to see and judge him. Meursault only after the fact grieves and worries over his death. With him being so close to his final waking hours, is when we weirdly enough see Meursault be the most human he's ever been. Becoming sad, angry, irrational, and his immediate coping response is to rationalize the situation. He thinks back to his missing father who his mother had once told him about. His father once went to watch a murderer be publicly executed, and after going he spent half the day throwing up. It makes him wonder, why would his father feel remorse for the death of a murderer? But isn't it quite obvious? Death is the only thing that matters. When life is about going through the motions, isn't the last moment of a person's life, when they permanently cease their habits, the most important part of life? Meursault even goes as far to say that if he got out of prison, he would literally go out and watch every execution there ever was. The idea of coping with his death by rationalizing goes even further, as in his mind he takes on the whole process of executions and points out his flaws. Like for example how guillotines can fail to cut off a person's neck, or that condemning someone to death leaves no room for redemption. Though, the most telling scene of all is when the chaplain of the church comes to his prison to convince him to join God, so that he may be forgiven at the time of his death and go up to heaven. He instead angrily and irrationally retorts as light once again gleams over him, exclaiming how it doesn't matter if he were to join God. He doesn't want to spend his last moments of life thinking about God. What does it matter if God exists or not when the universe treats everyone with the same indifference? From Emmanuel's beaten dog to the wife that Raymond beats, are either of these two scenarios given any more redemption or care by God or the greater universe? No, of course not. The universe is uncaring, and he reached that same uncaring understanding shortly after the chaplain left, finding solace in that same uncaring feeling, knowing that he could die happily since his death would come regardless. And if anything, he'll wish that there will be as big of a crowd as possible on the day of his execution, and the universe shall accept his death with the same gentle yet uncaring embrace as it accepts everyone else's death. And at night, alive with signs and stars, I open myself to the gentle difference of the world, finding it so much like myself, so much like a brother really. I felt that I had been happy, and was happy again. For everything to be consummated, for me to feel less alone, I had only wished that there be a large crowd of spectators the day of my execution, and that they greet me with cries of hate.
I never understood why theorists of Project Moon don't really look at the symbolism put on the games when making predictions, since a lot of the egos of the Sinners of Limbus company predict their eventual cantos by referencing themes that played a part. Now, I'm not saying that Hong Lu's egos literally told us about his special jade's function, but there were several hints about control, traveling, and following roles given to you. Now that you know this, I'm sure you are as interested as me to know why Meursault shares egos like regret with Faust, electric screaming with Dawn, pursuance with Rodion, capote with Ishmael, and yearning Merkala with Dawn again, since the sharing of egos then technically mean the sharing of characteristics with one another, which can tell us a lot about meursault actually. Even better, the base egos, although usually dated, also give us a direction of what a Sinner's Canto will be about. You can predict the Canto's themes using a base ego by looking at several patterns that are common amongst them all, which are the prisoner's window, the barbed wires, the shadows, and what type of background it is. Now, it has taken me a few months to perfect my analysis of base egos, so I might say something different from what I've said in the past, but I'd say I'm getting pretty close right now. Now, prisoner symbolism is clearly a theme for the LCB, and even Hohenheim made it clear to us that, quote,
"These sinners, bound to limbus company, are still fettered by their chains and shackles."
So it would be fair to use this prison-related symbolism very literally. A prisoner's window, then, is related to a sinner's past, what used to be their life before they got locked up or committed their sins. It's an ideal vision of their freedom usually, what their life was like before they got locked up by limbus company. Next, the barbed wire are the conditions of their contract perhaps, what keeps them literally bound by limbus company. Perhaps it could also reference the difficulty of completing their contract, as Heathcliff has the most and is grabbing it, maybe referencing how getting Kathy back has proven to be incredibly difficult. And Faust has no barbed wires because she's here on her own accord. Moving on, the shadows then are something that puts a stamp on their life, either through their abilities, what is controlling them, or again, just something of their past. Some are more visible than others, and Rodion doesn't even have a shadow, which could mean nothing. Then outfits could also symbolize some stuff, as each sinner's prison outfit is a bit different. And lastly, a background tells us the state of the mind, or again, just the past of a sinner. I might just make a longer video about base egos in the future, since there's a lot to unpack. Let me know if you want it. Okay, so now that you have that down, I can use this information to dissect meursault's base ego. So, to start, general vibes are of course grey, sad, and homogeneous. His prisoner's window shows us a clear view of what I assume is N-Corp. There are people wearing the same attire, the buildings share the same shade of grey, and in the background there are 3 rectangles covered in what appears to be barbed wires. Now, if this is supposed to be meursault's outside world before he got contracted, I assume it was a boring one, enough so to numb him down just like in The Stranger. Now, what supports this idea is that we all know that N-Corp is a corporate hellhole, where you can get suicide in a can for only $4.99, where there are strict rules to follow and many taboos to be broken, which results in you getting hunted by Vespa-like taboo hunters. This of course leads to many citizens of District 14 to be NPCs, either because they want to follow these rules, have been molded to follow these rules, or follow them in fear of being ostracized. So the forced NPC-ness of N-Corp would explain the grey and boring colors. An area based on everyone being the same would also have an effect on our meursault too, as although he is willing to follow these rules, in fact it's comforting to him to be obedient and slothful to society's rules, they would also put a lot of pressure on him without him knowing, but I will come back to that idea later. So, these NPCs are all here together around these 3 rectangles. These rectangles will most likely be incredibly important, as it is probably the reason why meursault has the number 3 come across so often in his kits. I'm serious, by the way, when I say that the number 3 is very important for meursault, and it's probably related to protection, not judging, and something emotionally heavy for meursault, which would be worse if these rectangles are monoliths. Anywho, this pattern of 3 is most likely related to the 3 people not accusing meursault of his crime that he mentioned in his original teaser trailer of Limbus, which probably means this will be Marie, Salamano, and Raymond, but we can't know for sure yet. However, these 3 rectangles will be important, and I have a theory for it in my final prediction. Moving on, being accused is an important theme not only in his base ego, but also of course in The Stranger, people pointing fingers, accusing you, etc. Being accused of being different, unhuman, and like the devil will definitely be a huge part in Canto 10, considering the white pointing fingers and the eyes in his base ego. It's arguably the most important detail of his background. However, eyes play multiple roles of symbolism for meursault, as is it not only symbolizing people judging him, but also the special ability meursault might hold. Because did you know that most sinners have been revealed to have been hired for their special abilities? It's why they have Sinclair, normally a weak boy, but sometimes he could just pop his ult. It's why they have Heathcliff, normally a roadman, but he will learn to pop his ult in the future too. And when looking at what little dialogue meursault has, we know he has a really keen eye with noticing details. He can measure distance, composition, expressions, and emotions, so it's very likely that meursault was some sort of observer, perhaps someone to notice and observe people breaking taboos of N-Corp. I mean, the canto is called the gaze bearing after all. A gaze, looking, observing, I think you get it. So he's a middleman in a sense, not a taboo hunter, since a lot of people make this mistake somehow, even though meursault literally said he has very clearly not been a fucking taboo hunter and he looked at Vespa files. Are you stupid? Anyways, this keen eye of his is something that shaped his life since it is the shadow of his base ego. However, I have stated before in the past that this technically doesn't count as a shadow as the shape is weird, but a lot of shadows are weird, so I'm counting this as a shadow again, meaning this ability of his does put a remarkable stamp on his life. But again, the lines are jagged and it almost looks like graffiti. That, and considering the Kant experiences of N-Corp, someone could have framed meursault in a way and it would explain the weird shadow. All I can say about it is that something fishy might be up with it, or it could reference the false narrative about meursault, but I'll get back to that later. Now, moving on, his barbed wires are normal. Yeah, I feel like his contract is gonna be fairly normal, not too easy, not too difficult, so I'm just gonna move on. I also want to mention the fact that he has literal chains binding him that probably will play an important part, since it connects to the themes of being a sinner in general, but also being a wage slave and literally being chained to your job, so it could also be related to the ability of meursault in some way. Either way, Kim Yi-hoon will probably put some fucking meta reference in it to Dante's and meursault's chains, like they did with Ryoshi in Canto 9. Meursault, it seems that even though we are all sinners chained together, you were imprisoned most out of all of us.
Monsieurs, don't worry. With you guys, I was never the stranger. But now I know.
Then, his prisoner's outfit has him with the striped coat like most sinners in their base ego, but he's also seen wearing a striped business tie, something other sinners don't have, perhaps referencing his relationship with work again, and his need to follow orders, something that ties him down and makes him slothful. Lastly, for egos, I also like to look at their voice line, effects, their sin affinities, etc. for some extra clues. The voice line, "The multitude tightens its hold," can also reference the fact that it didn't matter if 3 people didn't judge our meursault or try to help him, as is referenced by his passive giving 3 protection, because the multitude, aka the majority and the narrative, decided what happened to our meursault, and perhaps even the 3 that didn't judge him. N-Corp tightened a hold not only on him by treating him this way, but also had a hold on the narrative around meursault. It's why it's bind and attack power down, as when being accused through a narrative with people not even trying to understand you, your counter-arguments, especially in court, will be weaker. And because meursault believes he didn't do anything wrong and stands his ground, the scale is pride. So his base ego gives a pretty clear direction of what themes will play a part in his canto, or at least what was planned for meursault at the beginning of development of Limbus Company. Narratives, 3 important people, his job and observation skills, but how about we look at some other important patterns in his egos? A theme not only prevalent in the book, but also for our meursault, is that he refuses to judge others, and, like I mentioned earlier, is quite obedient. He is willing to help out a lot of bad people simply because he has no spine. Even Kim Yi-hoon was making it clear to us that this will be important for later, since meursault has been made an obedient puppy boy twice, specifically a Doberman in his birthday art, a breed specialized in protecting with its increased status points in stamina, strength and intelligence. Not only that, but fun fact, during World War II, the Doberman was used alongside the German Shepherds as war dogs, meaning meursault might have been the lapdog as something related to violence, perhaps the lapdog of taboo hunters, considering the interaction with Vespa. But his theme of being obedient is really prevalent in the egos. Here are some things that lead me to believe so. Just to get this out of the way, the refusal to judge gets referenced in Chains of Others with his passive as well, but there the number 3 is present a lot, so it might not be related to meursault's characteristic, but more the 3 people that were likely not trying to judge meursault. Then, meursault also has Krulu's Wallop, which is all about the toxic, dare I say deadly, work culture in the city. Work is a theme which I will get back to in a second, but for now I wanted to mention that the event also tries to get to you to click yes to the prompt over and over, perhaps symbolizing some sort of obedience. N-Corp must have forced this man to do some horrible work to get him to be this desensitized and obedient. As meursault has stated before,
Repeated exposure to similar stimuli is recommended. Desensitize oneself to this sensation.
Perhaps implying that he might have gone through or forced someone else to go through repeated experiences, perhaps Kant experiences. However, one ego comes to mind the most when thinking of meursault's non-judginess, and that is of course pursuance. This is interestingly enough an ego shared with Rodion, which is what I like to call the duo of judged and judger. When looking at the abnormality heavily executor scribe's mirror dungeon event, you see that the abnormality actually isn't the one that judges, but its job is to record the judgment of the one above. Now, following judgment of, quote, the one above could reference several things. For example, following the ideas of others. Rodion had her own morals in a way, but was steered by Sanya and acted out as an executioner for him. For meursault, this definitely means that he was forced to act out insane orders for N-Corp with no right to refuse. Hell, this supports my theory that his orders had something to do with judging or observing as well, since his corrosion hands get literal gauntlets of the lithograph talking about acting out an execution. Okay, what does it all mean? Well, well, meursault isn't someone who judges the orders he is given and the characteristics of the people he hangs out with. For not only is it in his character, such is also life in the city, according to him. He was also likely in a position that made him unable to refuse orders as well. Perseverance hints at this with the religious themes. His abnormality is literally praying, which is not only prevalent in The Stranger, but also it's most likely referencing the taboos in N-Corp here, which might have played a part in meursault being unable to refuse his work as well, as one might get judged for not agreeing with N-Corp's rules or religion. This again also connects with Screwloose Wallop's themes of being forced to work and enjoy it, but there are other egos which make this theme even more huge. Let's start with electric screaming, an ego shared with Don Quixote related to the abnormality of dreaming electric sheep. Now, I've talked about dreaming of electric sheep often on this channel, so I'll summarize, but it's basically about being seen as lesser than human, which fits with Don Bloodstream and how meursault is judged for being different than the norm. But electric screaming is also about oppression and exploitation, as a reference to the oppressed androids in the actual book counterpart. Now, clearly, we see meursault plugged up compared to a happy Don Quixote, referencing the Mirror Dungeon event where you plug more cables in the sheep to make it have a crash out and die. For me, this rings alarm bells regarding potential exploitation that led meursault to break down due to the pressure. Hell, his passive is called, quote, overloading cables. Here again, we see that meursault likely has no right to refuse work and might need it in a way, since he says that the electricity that is literally killing him is all that he has left. Next up, in the case of obedience, regret, with its related abnormality being forsaken murderer, is about being a test subject, again being seen as different than human and having no autonomy. This is why regret is shared with Faust, since she has no autonomy either and is most likely some sort of experiment, but I'll save that theory another time. Anyways, this might hint further at meursault being experimented on or being worked to death, almost making me believe it was some sort of punishment. And due to that, we again see that meursault has a lot of built-in pressure and frustration. However, regret also references the idea of laying down your morality to do your work, which again is something meursault probably has done as well. Then Capote referenced the idea of not being able to escape, as the abnormality brazen bull references a gruesome execution device where something very gruesome. Just Google it. But I'll get back to that and many other themes in this ego later, as I feel like bulls in relation to red and agitation in general, and for potential references to obedience in his egos, I don't know, more gruesome shit or something. Can reference bullfighting pits, how the bulls there are trapped in cages, in poor working conditions usually, and there are myths about them that affect their treatment, just like meursault. Holy reach? Perhaps, but I'm having fun. Anyways, the abnormality again references a suffocating work environment and rage, with its several ego gifts, and also explains why Ishmael has this ego as well, since the boat wasn't all that great of an environment either, was it? Then the last two egos are Yearning Merkala and Crushbound Past. These reference obedience a little less, but more so reference how meursault feels about it. Crushbound Past is clearly about the pressure I was talking about earlier, as it is referenced not only in voice lines but also the entire design, as the Nixie tubes you see here were often used to measure literal air pressure. The status effects for these Nixie tubes are also called accumulated past, as the stress around his past probably builds up, but in general, the themes of automation references obedience too, as he behaves like a literal machine, just following orders. Then Yearning Merkala is all about desire. This is mostly about desire with Marie, let's be real here, but his corrosion also talks about his desire to maybe inflict hurt upon N-Corp as well, perhaps as a result of breaking due to the pressure of being the lapdog. I will use this to transition to the next big theme of meursault, which is of course the crime and the punishment. Lots of egos reference the crime of meursault, the pressure leading up to it, and his time in prison. We all already know how this goes. He goes crazy, becomes a stranger, and unloads bullets. But there are still more observations to be made when you compare the story to the egos as opposed to analyzing the egos by itself. I'll shortly cover those observations now. To get the obvious one out of the way, regret is of course all about the repeating endings and beginnings. This references not only a moment in the book where meursault's mother told him that he can get used to anything since he got so used to his life in prison, but it also references the end of his normal life and the beginning of the end of his life. But also the ends and beginnings of mechanical days in prison are a thing book meursault got used to. Holy word salad. But this all means if our meursault got some sort of punishment, whether it be execution or forced labor, he almost certainly has gotten used to it in a way. Another thing about regret, the fact that the voice line talks about
This straitjacket isn't nearly enough to hold back my violence.
could again reference that pressure I talked about earlier, but note that whatever chains N-Corp had on meursault wasn't enough to keep him from committing the crime, aka whatever rules N-Corp had imposed upon meursault did not hold him back from committing this murder. So this could support the idea that he committed the murder because he distorted. Moving on, Persuan's voice line talks about
Before anyone else, you shan't pardon me.
which is interesting since meursault talks about a specific person here, a you with a ... afterwards, which is limbus's way of telling us that a person is hesitating, which leads me to believe it references someone who might have betrayed meursault during his sentencing. Dare I say, it could be Marie, since a lot of people actually suggested an evil Marie theory. Next up, I mentioned this earlier, Capote has a design that references an artwork made out of suffering. The execution device this is based off of is supposed to have a person in— Oh, I wonder why I keep getting age restricted. Maybe it's because you're explaining executions in great detail, PickleBloom. Fun fact, the person that designed this device was the first person it got tested on. This could reference how the news station of course made a spectacle over meursault's murder, aka art was made out of suffering, but also the fact that the screams get distorted by the trumpet, referencing the headlines with a twisted narrative. You get what I'm saying? N-Corp might have blown our meursault's crime out of proportion too. Even more insane, perhaps this could imply that they made a Kant experience out of his execution, considering the maker of the bowl got executed by his own creation too, and again references the theme of exploitation I mentioned earlier. Perhaps meursault's punishment was a taste of his own medicine. Now, if it were the case that N-Corp made a Kant experience out of whatever the hell meursault experienced, it would explain the themes of an identity which cannot be escaped, that some of his egos have, since it would make him even more of a celebrity, as regret was an infamous experiment, and electric screaming and Screamer's wallop show him to be of high importance too, although this could also imply that he was of high status in N-Corp, or knew someone of high status in N-Corp, and that a lot of people were around for his trial. But anyways, the immoral court also get referenced with Yearning Mercala's passive being called Bloodthirsty Banquet, perhaps implying that the court was also quite bloodthirsty. But Yearning Mercala mostly references his yearning for connection and references his societal indifference, which is what I will use to transition into the next theme, his difficulty with emotions and people. Now, considering Yearning Mercala is his only lost ego, I figured it's related to his relationships most out of any ego. Now, I want to get it just out of the way. Welvader mentioned it earlier, but meursault absolutely yearns for Marie, something that reappears in the book several times, even when he is in prison. I think it's referenced here on purpose with how meursault talks about the flower, calling it beautiful and claiming it as his. However, the desire is also about connection in general. I mean, it's Yearning Mercala, he yearns for connection. This desire to understand and connect isn't something he dwells on for too long, but it is something that puts a toil on him. The abnormality logline also says, quote, it desires not to slay, nor does it to harm. That creature, it merely yearns for blood. AKA, in search of what it needs, it's hurting others. What offers comfort is also what restrains it. Meursault finds comfort in not judging. He finds comfort in not dwelling on emotions, but it only leads to confusion surrounding Marie and the courtroom, and relationships with him in general. He also finds comfort in his work and following orders, even when it puts pressure on him. Moving on, during the book, you slowly start to notice meursault getting more and more agitated, something he himself doesn't realize, as he is someone who focuses more on physical feelings instead of his mental feelings. Due to this focus on physical feelings and social unconventionness, dare I say meursault is probably autistic, meursault is also awkward and easy to misjudge. This connects with electric screaming, as again he shares this with Don Quixote, the other autistic girl, who put a lot of pressure and responsibility on themselves and can't really connect with people. The social connections that meursault does have are interestingly enough related to protection, as is not only seen in his base ego passive, but of course is also a theme in the book. However, he kinda went overboard with it. Then regret shows us that meursault might have also gotten numbed down due to his work, and it might have also led him to perform self-harm habits. Now, self-harm can come across in multiple forms, but in general, it hints at meursault's tasks numbing him down, which might have been something that helped him perform better, but it definitely turned in some sort of self-harm cycle. Do the work that you hate, numb yourself, repeat. I think I've made my point clear. So, to finish my analysis, I want to mention that The Stranger has big themes about finding solace in the meaninglessness of life, which is probably going to play out beautifully considering the themes of overworking, emotional connections, and religion we've already seen so far. Work will play a part in Canto 10. Hell, even Spring Cultivation grouped meursault together with Otis and Gregor, as their combos are called 9 to 5, Chains of Command, and Wing Employees of the Month. Couldn't have made it more obvious. I think that meursault was also extremely efficient in his work, as you can even see the exact moment Sinclair's breathing starts to intensify in Canto 3. But surrounding meursault's work is a certain sloth, as in the LCE event he explains, quote,
It is efficient to live within the bounds of rigidly established systems.
As why get a different job in the city when it could cost you your life and reputation? So considering themes about society, this will definitely play a part in that way. But how's about I mentioned what more I could find about his work, society and religion in his egos? Pursuance, of course, references the hypocrisy of the courtroom, the church and society society as a whole, calling Meursault a monster, praying for his downfall by painting him as a devil, using religion as a moral compass. His voice line says, quote,
I will pray for you, so that you shall surely break.
Making my point even more clear. But Meursault literally had to force the priest out because he couldn't listen to this nonsense anymore, meaning N-Corp definitely used taboos and their own beliefs as a mean of demonizing and even messing with Meursault. But Canto 10 in general might be about how religion and its communities have an impact on people as a theme in general, not just for Meursault, as again, Kim Yi-hoon isn't shy of making social commentary. But then the pursuit of meaning is perhaps a theme as well, as it is clear to us now that Meursault uses work as some sort of fulfillment, some sort of purpose he's given himself. For other citizens of N-Corp, the fulfillment of being in the nest and following its rules are enough. Being a good citizen is their meaning in life. But it's clear our Meursault has some struggles with that, numbing himself in his work even though he believes that work is fulfilling him as much as the others. I believe that Dante might try to help Meursault with finding his autonomy in this canto. Perhaps Dante might even find their own autonomy in a way, or questions it as well, considering they currently basically live to serve Limbus and the sinners, all the while their emotions and pains are getting ignored. I believe Dante's emotions are bottling up just like they did with Meursault, which might be cause for some sort of Dante rebellion in Canto 10. Oh, I forgot. Before we start the prediction, Kim Yi-hoon actually personally showed me the new Battle Pass E.G.O for Meursault. Let's take a look-see. Ha! Joking. This is actually an unreleased Meursault E.G.O, one that not a lot of people have seen yet. So, this is Hole in the Man, the abnormality with the E.G.O gift grey coat. Now, this abnormality also has monogamous colors, reminding me of N-Corp, and their whole thing is that they shoot themselves but won't die, with themes of misfortune only befalling you when you try to avoid it. Now, for some reason, the fake suicides remind me of canned experiences, perhaps implying Meursault enjoyed those suicides in a can, or that Meursault was a very unfortunate person. A very vague E.G.O, but I wanted to mention it quickly nonetheless. Wow, those are a lot of thoughts and predictions. Me and welvader quickly discovered that it's quite literally impossible to gather all our theories into one comprehensible prediction. So, what we instead opted to do is split our thoughts and theories into 3 segments. One where we predict what will happen, which contains stuff with clear evidence supporting it. The second one is what might happen, stuff that has some evidence but is still speculation. And the third is of course crackpot theories, where it has almost no evidence and is more a part where we will claim it might happen just to have a I told you so moment. Just for funsies. So first, let's get the boring theories out of the way. To start, let's bring her in, the one and only Carmen!
Hi!
We think she'll definitely play a role in this canto, not only because Meursault is aware of distortions, but also because of the whole sun thing in the Arknights events that we all know and love. Now, to make it clear, this isn't to say that Meursault distorted. In fact, there is still a possibility that Meursault hasn't distorted at all, but that he only worked closely with distortions. In dialogue, Meursault hints at closely knowing distortions and shares it openly, but doesn't share if he himself distorted. I feel like that'd be normal to mention when he would be talking about distortions anyways. But considering a lot of egos of Meursault hint at pressure building up and that Carmen is connected to the light just like it's the sun, means it's not out of the question that he distorted or will distort. Just don't expect it 100% because it is not yet confirmed or certain at all. But the fact that Carmen will appear at the very least is almost certain. Then me and welvader were in agreement that the fact that Meursault has an uncanny amount of skills in observing is very, very important. In fact, we think observing was part of his work, as he can scan compositions of people, estimated distance and motions. I think you get it. If this would mean anything for Meursault, it means it was part of his job to observe or note things down. I'll get back to this later. Moving on, because his base ego skill is pride, and because of the book, we believe Meursault stood his ground in court. He believed he didn't do anything wrong. Perhaps he was just following orders, he committed the murder to do something good, or someone just messed with the court. Either way, Meursault stays prideful in his actions throughout Canto 10. Then, a lot, and I mean a lot of things hint at Meursault being desensitized not only because he's built that way, but also because of his work, or at the very least because of N-Corp. His work at N-Corp was probably awful, with terrible work conditions, as there are multiple hints pointing towards exploitation, but Meursault was slothful and most likely not willing to change his occupation, either because he was forced or didn't realize how bad the exploitation was, and convinced himself that it was just life in the city, slowly desensitizing him along the way. Next up, we think that religion, as used as a plot point and theme in The Stranger, will be parallel to the sins and taboos of N-Corp. Considering human life and human experience is valued heavily there, it's possible that funerals, something surrounding the end of life, are of high cultural importance in N-Corp, maybe even more so than in the book. We are certain that N-Corp beliefs will be used to further ostracize Meursault, painting him as the devil and trying to force their beliefs onto him. Lastly, we are also certain that, just like in the book, news stations or something parallel to that will have made a spectacle of Meursault's murder, either because news was slow that time period or because Meursault just broke so many cultural taboos. So, all the stuff we mentioned seems pretty normal, right? Well, then let's move on on to the speculation side. First of all, we both agree that the meursault that we know now is the meursault from the end of the book, considering he is more observant and talks like he already experienced the hells of N-Corp. But this also means that there's a chance that everything, including Meursault's relationship with Marie, the crime, the punishment, etc., all already has happened and will be shown to us through flashbacks. This also leaves room for more story, as we are almost certain that shit will go down heavily this canto, considering the people we're about to meet there. However, I hope they will stick close to their adaptation and won't focus too much on the new stuff. Moving on, this theory is of course more popular. Meursault committed the murder due to a distortion. E.G.O's hint at this, dialogue hints at this, but we weren't sure if this is what really happened, cause it's not confirmed yet. However, the chance is at least a 50-50. Then, this is an interesting one. We believe that Meursault might have worked with taboo hunters closely, helped with violent-based work, or wanted to see executions. This is based off of the theory that our Meursault is the Meursault at the end of the book, where he states that on the day of his execution, he wants to see every execution out there. This might have been a motivator for our Meursault at work or was a passing time. Either way, he had some connections with taboo hunters. Him being connected to violent-like work would also explain why he had to look at Vespa files, but another interesting theory is that Meursault might have been desensitized not only by his work, but maybe also due to Kant experiences. Next up, we also think that the sloth of him staying in his line of work, or whatever the hell he was doing, was offering him comfort. He is obedient after all. However, this sloth and comfort in obedience in his work was probably also what led everything to go to shit for him as well. And of course, we believe Autus and Gregor development might appear in Canto 10, because they share the spring cultivation status effects. Not only that, but of course N-Corp is important for Gregor considering Herman, and Autus not only because our Canto is coming up after Canto 10, but also because they share some themes. Moving on, I think Kim Yi-hoon might blast us with a bunch of social commentary on religion. Again, controversial, but it's such a theme in the book and for N-Corp. And considering a lot of Cantos tackle societal problems like war, poverty, etc., religion wouldn't be out of the question. Hell, they're already doing it with the index. And then lastly, this is one of my favorites, and one I personally headcanon to be true. We believe that Meursault might have used his scanning abilities to scan for taboo breaking. More specifically, he can literally scan any person and see what percentage of them is prosthetic, making him extremely efficient for scanning taboos. It would also explain why he stayed silent about his participation with N-Corp in Canto 3. It would have been awkward to explain to Sinclair that he was helping out with that stuff. Quick side note, I know he said he wasn't really part of that specifically, but he could have helped, you know? Anyways, him being used to scan for prosthetics or taboos being broken would fit with his themes of obedience and non-judginess, as he helped a woman abuser in the book, so it's not out of the question that he would help with the nasty part of N-Corp. See, we're getting somewhere, but how's about we discuss some crackpot theories? So, there's a very high chance that the Blue Boy Band, aka the Sovereigns of Stars, will show up again in Canto 10. In fact, they might appear with multiple members or a big fight will break out. Usually they showed up every other canto, but they've been missing for a bit, meaning something might be brewing. Not even that, but also the fact that Damien had beef with young Cromer. Yeah, shit might go down. Then, we already mentioned this before, there's a chance someone else distorted instead of Meursault. Now, this could be for example his mother, in which Meursault might have killed her to stop a disaster from happening. The only evidence for this is the Virgilius voice line mocking Meursault by saying he stopped the disaster from happening, which could mean nothing. And then yes, my favorite crackpot theory is that the monoliths in the background of Meursault's base E.G.O could have been used for Marie, Celeste and Raymond. Considering there are hints towards them trying to help Meursault in court, N-Corp could have punished them for trying to help by giving them a fitting execution, letting them distort and then killing them, or something similar. But again, that's crackpot. The monoliths could also mean something else, like maybe N-Corp experimented with them, maybe Meursault experimented with them, or he got experimented on considering his vast knowledge of distortions, but who knows. Anywho, monoliths and the number 3 are probably intertwined and probably important. Then, I mentioned this before, but Meursault might have been an executor himself or helped with the executing of people, as pursuants show his gauntlets turning into lithographs of the ordering of executions. And then another crackpot theory is that the Kant experiences had some sort of influence on the court, perhaps to paint a narrative like in the book, or maybe even make up the conviction itself. There is a possibility that someone betrayed Meursault and used the Kant experience to manipulate the court. It would explain why Meursault is unsure when he killed his mother, and would fill the hearts of people I've seen comment about the evil Marie theories. I think a Marie or Maman portrayal would be cool too, if Maman is alive. Speaking of Kant experiences, there's also a chance Meursault's execution or something else he went through was made into a Kant experience, since a lot of his egos hint at meursault being famous in N-Corp, but it could also just be because the news made him a superstar, or because his mom might have been a high-ranking member in N-Corp. This would further explain why N-Corp got so upset. Then his murder might have also been a good thing, as again Virgilius's voice line hints at him preventing some sort of disaster. Was his mother distorting and he stopped it, or was it an N-Corp cover-up? Who the fuck knows? Next up, this is basically the joke I mentioned earlier in the beginning of the ego analysis, where chains of Dante will get cross-referenced with meursault's chains, perhaps so they were both bound and are/were prisoners. Perhaps themes of learning how to move on and make progress even when you are still bound and imprisoned. Lastly, this would further be a segue for some development for Dante, since Dante is helping everybody out, but who is helping Dante? Dante is still bound and can feel all the pain, yet they are neglected. And of course also some Sinclair development might happen, not only because his Mark played a big role in the previous chapters, but also, of course, his history with N-Corp will play a part. So, what do you think? Do you think me and welvader are geniuses, or do you think that we're completely wrong and your own theory is way better? Well, if you think that, then why not share your own theories in the comments? I would love to hear everyone's thoughts. And also, now that I've spent so much time on this video, I'm actually scared for Canto 10 to actually drop and prove everything that we've worked on to be fucking wrong. Now, a special thanks to my YouTube members. Thank you Pointy Well for the bloomed, and thank you Chibi Kyoto for the pickling. And thank you 386Y for the 1 month pickled, Devil Child Mike for the 3 months pickling, Dark Mage for the 5 months pickling, DY50, I don't know how to fucking say that, for the 5 months pickling, and Tiny Skull for the 6 months pickled. I appreciate it, and thank you everyone else for being a pickled. It is currently 4:50 AM as I am recording this and finishing up this fucking video. I can hear the birds chirping. Update, it is now 1 PM. I haven't slept. I had to remove all of the dirty words because YouTube is mad at me.